My hope is built on nothing less than Trump's Supreme Court justices. Oh, wait, that was last time. This time it's Libertarian cabinet members. How are we doing on that front, Jacob?
Well, time will tell. I mean, we already got we have one in paper if we're going with uppercase L,
Yeah,
technically. But
yeah, Robert F. Kennedy, right?
yeah. So I
I believe
kind
Angela
of
McArdle
grading.
said that was our guy on the inside, right? Chase Oliver
Yeah,
wasn't libertarian enough, but RFK is our guy on the inside.
yeah. I mean, make tallow great again. Doesn't sound as good on a hat or bumper sticker, but
I think Doug would
uh,
wear that hat 100% though. Doug
I mean,
Stewart,
listen.
our
When I first joined LCI, and I think this not new. This isn't unique to LCI. I think this is a common libertarian thing. But when you become a libertarian, you're generally allowed one deviation, and mine just happens to be seed oils, right? I think that seed oils are, uh, I mean, like, I have no problem with heroin. I have no problem with sex work, but seed oils is where I draw the line, man.
yeah. I think for whatever reason the health stuff I'm really a purist on because like the idea that somebody might come into my house and take my Doritos I think just enrages me.
Are you gonna get Dorito flags? Come and take them.
Yeah, I just might. Well, and also just like have you seen these Fruit Loops that don't have the dyes in them, like
Yeah.
the dyes that are banned in here? They look sickly. They look horrible. There's not even like a blue in there. I don't want that. Jeez.
Oh
I mean, we used to be a
boy.
proper country, Jacob. I'm just saying.
Right. Right. Yeah. If I can't poison myself with government subsidized processed foods, then I'm oppressed.
Well, I'll take the subsidies out of it, but give me my blue Fruit Loops. All right. So why don't you tell people what we're doing here, Jacob?
Yeah.
This is
So
kind of
so
your
we're
show.
here tonight. This has been something that we've been like wanting to do for a while, and we haven't been able to sort of align everyone's calendars. And it turns out tonight we still weren't able to align everyone's calendars. And so Cody and I are just going to talk to each other for like the 10th time in a few
We've
week
been talking a
span.
lot. Yeah.
Yeah. No,
It's
it's
getting
good. I
tense.
enjoy.
It's like being in a lifeboat. Eventually, we're just gonna get really, I think.
Right. No, I mean at some point it's like I don't know. Like, is it us? Like, are we the ones? Like, it's like, oh yeah, we'll talk with Cody, we'll talk with Jacob, but if they're gonna be there together, like we're just gonna like leave them alone to like maybe that meme of like libertarians fighting libertarians and
Hmm.
libertarians are betting on the
Hmm.
the libertarians
Yeah.
fight. So like maybe we're the libertarians fighting here at LCI, and then like there's a separate chat we're not part of where like Doug and Kerry and Norm are sitting there just like placing bets on how this latest iteration is going to go.
Yeah. I think we're just the overachievers in the group, Jacob. I think we plan things and we show up and. I know. I'm not dissing anybody else. I'm just saying.
You have a great reformed work ethic for an Anabaptist.
Yes. Absolutely.
Sorry.
Well,
All
hey,
right, but yeah,
I've never seen a Calvinist raise a barn. That's all I'm gonna say.
we're here tonight to talk about the I don't know. I guess like the somewhat interesting spin to Trump 2.0, as the title of this live stream calls, that perhaps is giving some libertarians some thought of some cause for optimism in the next 4 years. I think generally libertarians are rightfully skeptical of the duopoly and think, there's that saying, I forget who came up with it, but no matter who you vote for, you end up with John McCain, right? And I think that generally holds true. And even if one, the lesser of two evils trope is generally an advisable tactic, although I guess caveats here at LCI, we don't make political endorsements or tell you how to vote or anything like that. Yeah, it might be Tom Woods, Bibberty. I'm not sure where I originally heard that, but that does sound like
I think
something
I've heard
Tom would
Malice
say.
say it,
Yeah, maybe Tom stole it from Alice. They're buddies.
or either or.
Uh,
Yeah.
Either or, yeah. But so yeah, we're here to talk about like so a lot of libertarians did publicly announce that they were going to vote for Trump last election. I guess I'm it's no secret that I was one of them that said I was going to vote for Trump. And there's been some interesting developments over the last several weeks since since he won. Now he's been inaugurated, sworn in. So we're going to have a conversation to be like, what's kind of the future cast the next 4 years, and talk about what's already happened, and kind of come away. The purpose of this conversation will be to see if we come away thinking that we have cause for optimism, cause for being wary, maybe both at the same time. So, Cody, what are your initial thoughts on just sort of, I guess, like a general sense of where you're coming from, evaluating all of this over the last couple months?
Yeah, and it's interesting to note. I mean, this is something we've been planning to do for over a month, and so you could argue that we're both in better and worse positions than we were a month ago, because you have certain talking points that you could hit, things that you feel like Trump has done that are positive, but I also have stuff I can hit. And so we've actually seen a little taste of what Trump's done. So I mean, ultimately what I would say is this kind of debate over whether or not you should support Trump as a libertarian is really about what it means to be libertarian, and in particular libertarian anarchist, which I think you and I at least start, Jacob. A libertarian is somebody who has, I think, a specific vision as to what the role of governance should and shouldn't be. In a statist society, there's different ways that libertarians could approach, trying to create that world. They can choose to sit out on the political process because I see it as corrupt and evil. So that's like just a really overly principled stance, I guess. They could participate through activism or by voting for libertarian officials who are going to undermine the state apparatus, or they can vote for whoever they see as the best statist who has a chance of winning. And I'm not so much of a purist that I don't see room for activism, but I guess to me, throwing my support and my vote at literal statist seems opposed to libertarianism as I would understand it. And I know you disagree, and I'll let you maybe speak to that. But and it's not because you're an unprincipled person; you have principles. But in our previous election, at least, you were, I think, more concerned than I was about pragmatism, voting for the best statist in hopes that he'll push things more in the direction of libertarianism. I don't think anyone at LCI is really like an extreme pragmatist or an extreme purist. Our colleague Mike Meharry, who was potentially going to be here, but maybe he's watching at home, his work with the 10th Amendment Center is really focusing on weakening the federal government and redistributing power downstream toward the individual. And I think all of us have, at LCI, I think all of us do, have at least some positive feelings about what Javier Milei's been doing in Argentina, what libertarianish congressmen like Rand Paul, Justin Amash, former Congressman Justin Amash, and Thomas Massey have done. But I also think that most of us, would have happily voted for Ron Paul for president if he had not been cheated out of the nomination. So I don't think any of us are really total purists, but we still disagree about the Trump strategy. So I guess the real question is, where do we draw the line? At what point are we being so pragmatic that we've compromised on principle? And what if our pragmatism only gets another authoritarian in office at the expense of our reputation? How pragmatic is that really? So, those who followed libertarian party politics knew about the different caucuses, the Mises Caucus libertarians. They proclaimed more or less victory through Trump because he claimed he would put a libertarian in the cabinet, which he hasn't really yet, that he'd free Ross Ulbricht, and we did get that one, and because they thought they might get a few libertarian policies through, and perhaps they will, but keep in mind that Trump's border czar is threatening to arrest mayors of sanctuary cities, so there goes nullification. His national security director nominee is saying that Trump will escalate the war in Ukraine. He definitely wants to escalate the situation in Israel, and in fact already has. His Treasury Secretary nominee was a Soros protege who hosted fundraisers for Al Gore, Hillary Clinton, and Barack Obama, and he's proposing the most aggressive tariff policy since before the income tax was created. Plus, he's got all the maturity and self-control of Napoleon as a toddler, so Ron Paul ain't. So I've talked for a while, so I'll wrap it up. Ultimately, I think that this libertarian gambit to back Trump is based on, really, at its core, cynically hoping to use Trump's stupidity and lack of principles to our advantage, to steer him toward policies we want to see enacted. And sure, he is stupid and he's unprincipled, but it's in the same way that a scorpion is stupid and unprincipled, and I think we're going to get stung. So that's my that's my sort of opening remarks, and I'd like to hear your case for why you decided. You've given this sort of at length in other venues, but why did you feel that voting for Trump was consistent with your libertarian position, and how do you feel about it now that we're a little bit into the Trump administration?
Yeah. So I think the strongest case you have there, which was something I've had to think about a lot, both before and after I made my decision, is the biggest cost was going to be, or risk, was our reputation, right? Because I think my argument for why I decided to do it was essentially that I didn't think there was much to lose, that if the worst case scenario of what I saw for a Trump presidency, because I've already seen 4 years of Trump, while it's not good for liberty, it doesn't seem like it could be worse than what 4 years of Biden was, or what 4 years of Harris seemed like it was going to be, which was largely just a continuation of what we had just finished with the Biden administration, and really was basically just a continuation, and in some ways a doubling down on all the worst aspects of Obama's two administrations, and adding in even more wokeism and more imperialism. So I basically said, well, in most elections, kind of like I said in the introduction here, it does generally seem like there's not much of a difference in the two candidates, and so either don't vote, or if you're going to vote, protest vote, or vote for a third party or something, seems to have more merit than voting for one of the, even if you have one candidate who you think is marginally less bad. It's kind of like, well, there's nothing to gain. I felt like in this instance there seemed to be more to lose and more to gain in kind of both of those considerations, to the point where it felt like a threshold had been met, although just barely. And I said this, like, I didn't make my decision, I think, till I think it was like the week of, really, the election. And because I was kind of a fence sitter, I was like, it seems bad, it seems close to the threshold, but not like really enough that I still feel comfortable doing it. And then in the last week there was like a heavy ramp up of like Elon and Vivek with their DOGE idea, sort of like signaling to Ron Paul and like echoing Ron Paul's tweets and sentiments and whatnot, and saying like, hey, we think we should have Ron Paul as an advisor. And that brought up like conversations about the Federal Reserve and the things that Ron ran on when he ran in 2008 and 2012. And to me, it just felt like, all right, this is like a mixed bag, but there's enough here that I feel like I see a lot more opportunity to put Trump in a position where either he can do some good and we'll celebrate that, and then the bad stuff he does, or if he fails to accomplish any of the good things he and his allies were saying they would do, that gives us the opportunity to really stick it to them and hang them by their own words and say, well, you said you were going to do this, you made direct and indirect appeals to libertarians and libertarian messages, and here's the ways that you're falling short of that. And so it felt like there was, I guess that was the most concise way I can answer that, or summarize my thoughts, were that there was more upside, potential upside to Trump, and more and what seemed like clearly more potential downside to voting for Harris. And I just say what you want about the LP and the LP's candidate, Chase Oliver. We had him on here on our platform. Alex and I interviewed him. Actually, Alex and I interviewed him together, and I think Alex had his own separate interview with him. I don't dislike Chase. I've met him in person several times. I had some good conversations with him. I think he's actually a pretty decent libertarian, but I just felt like if you're going to put a protest vote in, it needs to be a very strong protest, and it just didn't feel like Chase ran a strong enough message and a strong enough campaign to really feel like, yeah, I want to put my energy behind this. And I contemplated it. I have picture evidence of this. Before the week that I kind of switched my position, I was actually considering just voting for Chase, just out of like, I'm just going to vote Libertarian. And I had a Chase Oliver yard sign, and I'd already been kind of arguing with people. But what I kind of realized was anytime I was talking about arguing for Chase or arguing to vote for Chase, I wasn't able to go like, hey, just go listen to this clip from Chase. Okay, go look at this great platform position that Chase. It was just like I was just arguing for libertarianism to people, and I wasn't able to like pitch Chase. I just had to pitch the LP and the message, and so it didn't feel like a very convincing case. So yeah, that's where I'm coming from. I certainly have my concerns about things that Trump might do that I think are very bad, but it's just I have a couple very tired out slogans here, and one of them is to just always ask compared to what. And it felt like in this case, all things considered, it was a gamble worth taking.
Well, yeah, and you used the, I mean, thinking about compared to what and the gamble language. I mean, I think recently we were in a back and forth signal chat. Um, I kind of liken it to like an investment. Like, you know, if we assume the status quo is kind of what we're going to get, I mean, status quo is bad. I think eventually the country's going to be tanked if we keep going that direction. Although I don't think Trump makes any significant improvements there. Um, but I think if we sort of assume the status quo is kind of like our baseline and not actually liberty, then I think when we talk about, well, how does Trump compare to the status quo? And there, I think we can have some really interesting, I think really kind of enlightening conversations about what that actually looks like. And so what I had said to you was that I felt compared to the status quo, Trump was high risk, high yield. He was an investment that could yield a lot of really important and great things. But there was also, I think, some significant changes in the negative direction that he would actually pose to the status quo. And, you know, and so you recently sent me an episode of Part of the Problem where Dave Smith, a libertarian Trump voter, said that Trump is a narcissist who thinks he knows everything but doesn't have a deep understanding of anything, and that he commands a cult of personality, which is a great endorsement. But those are the kinds of things that anarchists have really always said about rulers of the state. I mean, that's the kind of thing that, you know, Murray Rothbard would have said, right? But I think Trump really takes that to a whole new level. I mean, the fact that Dave Smith sort of singled that out as a Trump characteristic, as Trump characteristics, that he's a narcissist, that he thinks he knows everything, he doesn't have a deep understanding of anything, that he commands a cult of personality. And so with that in mind, why would any libertarian think that Trump is a better alternative to the status quo? And there's, like I said, there's a few things you can point to. I mean, I wrote an article for libertarianchristians.com for LCI called Between Iraq and a Hard Place. And it was basically just kind of looking at Trump's foreign policy and how he sort of ruffled the feathers of the foreign policy world. And, you know, there were, in some ways, he did it in ways that I think were good. But in other ways, like, they actually had some valid concerns because it was like, you know, obviously they didn't like Ron Paul either, but at least they sort of felt like Ron Paul was principled and you kind of knew what to expect. I think their concern about Trump was like a very reasonable concern, which is that Trump is so erratic, you really don't know what he's going to do for sure. And that goes back to that high risk, high yield thing. And so, like, you know, for me, you know, as libertarians, we already, I think, kind of knew that, like, our Democrat and Republican friends, we knew what they couldn't seem to figure out, that the status quo is already statist, it's already oppressive, and it took someone as brazenly authoritarian and corrupt as Trump for them to actually notice a problem. We already noticed it. You know, they're the frogs slowly boiling in the waters of statism, and Trump was too rapid a temperature change, so they want to jump out. And so, you know, we've been talking about the boiling water this whole time, so Trump doesn't seem that different to us, which kind of makes sense. But what doesn't make sense to me is arguing that the guy who's a more obvious authoritarian, who commands a more obvious cult of personality, is actually an improvement. To me, it's like, you know, if it's good to support someone who's dispositionally a tyrant just because he's against the old order, then we should argue that Lenin was better than the Tsar, that the Third Reich was better than the Weimar Republic. And so when I hear compared to what, when I criticize Trump, I mean, even if we want to compare him to the status quo, even if there could be some high yield stuff, there's a lot of high risk. But my answer to that compared to what would be compared to freedom, and I'm just not really comfortable supporting a statist. Trump doesn't pass, you know, that test for me.
Yeah, so there's two things there. So the one, I don't know how to reconcile the sort of the different, you know, perspectives we have here, because you're saying Trump seems like a more obvious authoritarian, and I guess, like, maybe sometimes in rhetoric, but in practice, not that he's not an authority, like, they're all authoritarians, right? And if we're doing compared to liberty, then it's like, well, then, like, yeah, I mean, they all missed the mark by a mile. I mean, by, like, hey, you can't even see where the line is anymore. But in comparison to each other, it's like, I don't know, like, Trump, like, all the bad things about Trump don't seem to me, from 2016, and we don't have much of a sample size for 2.0 yet, but even what's projected, the worst of all of his policies really seem to me to come down to rhetoric on the border and the rhetoric around tariffs. Although with the caveat that if the perfect Trump vision of abolishing the IRS and the income tax happened and was replaced with tariffs, I'd still have some like qualms about that. Like, I don't know that that's a win, but that would be interesting. I'd be interested to see how that experiment worked out. I'm kind of skeptical that it could work out that way. It kind of seems like you're because one's more directly in his control and the other one not so much. But you could probably concede like that would be interesting to see how that would work out economically. It would probably affect everyone differently depending on where they're at within the. I've actually thought about how it could actually be bad for me personally, just as like someone who has 5 kids and just at my income bracket. It's like the federal income tax doesn't affect me as much as it might affect other people, whereas tariffs might. So it could still be bad for me, but maybe be good overall. And there's the seen and the unseen and all of that. I think.
I don't want to cut you off, and I want you to reach your conclusion on that. But just on the tariff point, I mean, I've thought about that a little bit because when he had said before, like, let's get rid of the IRS, I sort of had my own Trump sounds great, doesn't work moment, because it's like, that only works if you get rid of the spending. And so if he brings tariffs in, then maybe you can deal with it that way. Although it's not like we've actually ever paid for our government anyway, but we have, but not in a long time.
Yeah. There's the whole, do you cut spending first or cut taxes first? And there's some strong arguments on both sides. I tend to think it's probably better to reduce spending first, but then there's also this like, do you just take the wins you can get, or do you have to like roll back the state in this perfect sequential way? And I don't know the answer to that. Like that's
I think it matters though, doesn't it? I mean, and in particular with the tariffs thing, like I've thought about this a little bit because like tariffs could potentially pay for some of these, pay for the government. It has in the past. We'd have to really, I think, cut it down quite a bit to make it work. But yeah, I mean, the one thing that's as bad as the income tax is, the one thing you can say positively about it is that at least it's not as hard on the poor. And so, I'm a libertarian. I don't like government stealing from anybody, but I'm also a Christian, which means I care a little bit more about putting weight on the poor than I do on the rich.
Yeah, no, that's a completely valid point, I think, which is why I've thought like it'd be an experiment that I wouldn't have an initial, like, if it happened the way he pitched it, I'd go, well, let's see what happens. But my worry is that we're just going to get the worst of both. We're going to get tariffs plus income tax, which would obviously be a net bad. So I think, so to go back to what I was saying, I think in terms of the worst of what Trump is doing compared to the status quo, tariffs are the obvious one. And then the rhetoric on the border, he hasn't done anything yet. So like if he was to actually do the mass deportation he's talking about, I'll admit that would be even worse than Obama, who deported a lot of people, right? And but in general, just in terms of past performance, even as bad as he was on rhetoric, it kind of felt like, I think most libertarians would agree with me, even total open borders libertarians would agree with me that in general, from Bush to Obama to Trump to Biden, the immigration system, the deporting of immigrants, the detaining of immigrants, putting immigrants in facilities and cages, like, it's not clear that Trump was markedly, like any significant deviation worse than what came before him in a lot of ways. And Biden in some ways was as bad, or in some instances a little bit worse.
Yeah, I mean, they called Obama the deporter in chief. And yeah. I mean, if you just want to look at the pure numbers, Trump's immigration policy and Trump 1.0 was not maybe a significant deviation. But if you look at the ways in which it did differ, I think there's like just a nastiness and a vindictiveness to the way he approached it, the whole child separation thing. And what I learned about that is that there have been, meetings in the White House for years where people sat down and said, what if we separated the children? and like it was almost somebody always brings it up. It's kind of like, what if we kill all the poor? It's like, we'll put it in the computer and let's run it. I mean, we're not going to do it, but let's put it in the computer and run the numbers and see what happens. But it's like Trump actually did it. And so like there was a sort of sense that like he was willing to do what like everybody else thought was like, even the people who I think we think are kind of horrible people, they thought was too horrible. And I think it's early yet, but like when I look at what he's already done, and I've been paying attention a little bit, trying to pull some of this data together. I mean, so one change is he's targeting children and refugees that are already in the country. So that's a different change. He's trying to repeal sections of the 14th Amendment by executive order. That's the birthright citizenship deal. He's detaining American citizens without a warrant because they're Hispanic and didn't have their ID with them. So we talk about, they don't want to make the Nazi comparison, but papers bitte, and so that's not, I mean, that sucks, man. So, and also, I think not to mention that the likely effects on the supply chain and the cost of groceries could be really quite significant. I mean, perhaps as significant as his first term, uh, and especially if he pairs that with his proposed tariffs. So I mean, where I'm at right now, I certainly don't wish I had voted for Kamala, but I 100% do not regret not voting for Trump. I think he's a horrible human being, and in addition to being a statist. And I think, there's that whole thing where people would say, like, I could have a beer with George W. Bush or Obama. And I bet I bet they're great people if you don't pay attention to their, to what they did as presidents of the United States. I'm sure they're wonderful, loving, parents and, whatever. But there is a sort of extra added component to Trump. And it's I think what Dave said was I think summed it up pretty well.
But see, this is where, and I have two ways I can go, because I had another point I was going to make in my previous response, which I could deviate from. I think I will. So I kind of get what you're saying, but sometimes I feel like we need to actually do the opposite and sort of push back against sort of couching and disguising authoritarianism and tyranny in terms of his policies and stuff were bad, but at least he seems like a nice guy. It's like, because I feel like that sometimes is almost like we underestimate how nefarious that is. Like, to some extent, as you pointed out, some on the left, now, they tend to, other than maybe the immigration issue, they tend to sort of react to Trump and view him as a tyrant, but then make like all the wrong criticisms of him rather than sort of the right ones that you and I would pretty much like 99.9% down the board agree on, despite the fact having a difference in terms of how we evaluate the comparisons and if it was a good idea to vote for him or not in the past tense. But like it was a good thing perhaps in theory that or a silver lining of a sorts, that because Trump was such like a change in rhetoric drastically, that suddenly the temperature changed so quick that people kind of like noticed and started to push back. Not enough. Like, they haven't actually started to realize, ooh, wow, it's bad that the president has this much power and maybe we should repeal all the executive functions. So they haven't gone far enough with that yet.
Right.
But I don't know, maybe there's baby steps, maybe there's some seeds there that'll bear fruit in the future. That would be my hope. I haven't had any luck with my leftist friends and family, but I wonder if there's just to drive the point home, I wonder if there's an extra nefariousness to the wolf in sheep's clothing as opposed to a guy like Trump who just kind of like is what he is, and it's almost better for people to see that the emperor has no clothes rather than to kind of have this sort of like respectability instilled into the office and the system from someone like an Obama and a Bush who, it's like, oh yeah, we go to the baseball games with them and whatnot and get a beer. Meanwhile, like they've, look at the number of people that they've, pretty directly been responsible for, either directly killing or starving or, putting in absolute poverty, things like that.
Yeah, I've lost my hope for that because I had hoped that in the first term. I thought, like I used the illustration earlier of the frog boiling or whatever. And I think they have gotten the wrong lessons from that, because you'd think that, in the 4 years after Trump, they would have said, okay, we can't let anybody have that power again. If we think this guy is literally Hitler and we almost just had another Holocaust, against, trans people or whatever, which the other part of it is, of course, that they all sort of exaggerate most of the threats. But if they really felt that, why would they continue to support more power for the executive? Why would they continue to be pushing power up to the federal government? And so I've lost a sense that people, that I think that the emperor's clothes effect would really hit people. I'll say one thing real quick. There was a comment. Somebody said that Trump wasn't targeting children when I talked about his immigration policy. And that's actually, so that's not true. So the acting Homeland Security Secretary Benjamin Huffman announced that federal immigration authorities will be permitted to arrest people and carry out enforcement actions in and near places such as churches and schools, marking a departure from longstanding policy to avoid so-called sensitive areas. So just mentioning it as a point. But yeah, I mean, I really hoped that Trump could be a teachable moment for us, that we would sort of go, okay, this is what the state is. This is what I've been supporting. This is nuts. Why am I doing this? And maybe it has for some. Um,
No,
I
I mean I
think,
kind of agree with you. Like it hasn't had that desired effect, but I guess
mhm,
the counter to like, your point was sort of that like there's something extra. You seem to be especially like, well, maybe the policy's not too different, but there's a few different policy differences. But then also like there's this extra nastiness in Trump, and I just kind of go like, to me that just doesn't bother me because I just don't like. I guess for me as libertarians, it's like I'm not gonna really care that Obama and Bush sound nicer while they butcher people and deport people. It's like it doesn't do anything for me in the evaluation of you know comparing these presidents to each other in terms of the initial I guess like point we're having here is like is Trump more dangerous in like he's a special breed of a potential authoritarian type compared to the rest of them, and I personally am not convinced that he's not that. I mean, listen, like they're all authoritarians, they all violate countless libertarian and Christian precepts and teachings and values, but I just don't view him as um, especially dangerous in that in either of those. Actually, I find him more offensive sometimes on the Christian scale than the libertarian scale, if I'm being honest. Like I get up in
mhm,
arms when the guys sending Trump Bibles to public
yeah,
schools and signing Bibles at events. Like that gets my
yeah,
blood boiling because to me that's just like that's literally like that is a very perverse form of what is essentially kind of like a not the second commandment. Whatever one, don't take the Lord's name in vain. I guess that's three, right? So it's
it's
the third.
yeah, depending on if you have a Catholic, a Jewish, or a Protestant list, but
Right.
yeah, yeah, no, I mean, yes, Trump occasionally sounds like a libertarian, but he never sounds like a Christian. So there's that. Unless you're just a very stupid person, and I know that sounds maybe kind of mean, but I mean, come on, give me a break. Um, yeah, no, I mean, I think there is a sort of debate about who's more dangerous. Is it the authoritarian that thinks they're doing something good, or is it like the person who like just doesn't give a crap and is like actually so Trump is, if everything Dave Smith says about him, that he doesn't know anything, he thinks he knows everything, he commands a cult of personality, and he's a narcissist. Is that better or worse than Barack Obama, who means well, who's kind of smart, who kind of understands some things, but still he's in this position to do all these horrible things because that's the status quo, and we want to, he believes that we can sort of centrally manage things and make it work. That whole kind of Ronald Reagan, I'm from the government and I'm here to help, are the most dangerous, the scariest words you could ever hear. um and like, I mean, I think there is a certain amount of danger in the idealist who thinks he can remake the world in his own image. um and you know when I talk about Trump being high risk, high yield, the fact that he doesn't believe anything is an asset and a danger. And so, like, believe in anything. Like, so on the one hand, maybe because he's not particularly ideological, he's just not going to do very much. But like on the other hand, he doesn't have any any moral
Well,
principles.
but I feel like he kind of has a one principle now, and I think his principle, which isn't it isn't without some risk, but I think it's mostly positive. His one principle seems to be, uh, I see now that I got screwed over heavily by the intelligence agencies and at least some like he's more skeptical of the deep state and of the neocon establishment on the right than he was in his first term. Now, not nearly enough. There's still plenty of bad appointments, but I see him being more willing to go to up to bat to fight both of those two groups, and so I think there is that. Like when he, like it might be worth bringing this up. He, we recently had a pretty big win with the pardon of Ross Ulbricht, which I was pretty confident just because like I knew a lot of people, Massey, the LP with Angela, and others were heavily involved in getting this on Trump's radar and pushing for Ross to be freed. But it seemed like it was just going to be a commuting of the sentence to be like, well, he's going to be, released on time served, but like he would still live with the criminal record and having his rights stripped of him. So we got more than we were hoping for there. We got a full pardon, and Ross is free, and I think that's significant. And in his statement, he made two statements in his broader statement that I think are worth bringing up here. That one, he made gave large credit to the libertarian movement for championing for Ross for so long and like making the case for him being unrightfully imprisoned. And then also he made a connection saying that the same people that have been going after him for, again, now listen, as Dave Smith has said, and I would agree, Donald Trump, like every other president in my lifetime and before that, for the most part, is committed war crimes and done things that you could, in a libertarian sense, go and convict them, right? But none of the things that the establishment went after Trump for were either real charges or were like significant enough to be like, oh, you actually care about justice. It was more like a transparent, like, you just really hate Donald Trump and you're going to do whatever you can to, weaponize the judicial system against him. So Trump said, the same scum that, went after me are responsible for what happened to Ross. And so I think there's at least something there to, at least give libertarians some hope to be like, well, maybe this Trump's going to be at least a little bit more amenable. Like, as much as he has bad people in his orbit, there are some people who are at least more sympathetic to the cause of liberty and to at least being more, skeptical of sort of the neocon establishment on the Republican wing. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Not that it's going to be perfect by any means, but I think that's at least significant enough to say that there's, I think you would at least, would you agree with the statement that there seems to be at least a tangible difference in tone and nature to Trump 2.0 to Trump 1.0, or would you say that you kind of expect it to be more of the same?
It's hard to say. I think he's maybe more focused in a way. I think when you talked about Ross as maybe give an example for hope that he was going to see something differently, in the statement that you quoted from, the reason that Ross was personal for him was because he felt that was him, right? So the connection for Trump was that that they were going after him and they went after me, and so that felt personal. It's not that he sort of said, he certainly, that pardon did not read like something that Hans Hermann Hoppe would write. It was very, it was still a very narcissistic kind of statement. And, and even at the time, like, leading up to this, like, libertarians debated, is Trump going to pardon Ross? And I thought, like, probably, because Trump isn't double-minded. I mean, he's barely single-minded. He tends to say what he thinks, at least in that moment, which is, I think, does make him sort of different than a lot of politicians. The trouble is, he moves on quickly, so you have to get him to do it, to do the thing right in that moment, or it's not going to happen. He's going to move on. And so I don't know. I think that Trump is more singularly focused. I think he is angry, and I think he's kind of on a revenge tour, but I don't know that I would say that he's really learned. I mean, we talked about the left not really learning the lesson from Trump's first administration. I don't think Trump even learned the lesson from his first administration. Trump has not become a libertarian because of what happened with the Russiagate and stuff like that. He just takes it very personally, and he wants to hurt those people, but he still wants this big government to basically go out and do whatever he says, whether the Constitution agrees, whether the laws agree, whether regulations agree. So I just don't see that he's. I think, well, I don't know.
So I think like the people in his orbit though, like, so you got, and so this is like tough, right? none of the people in his foreign policy administration are great. They're not anti-war, in the sense that like you and I are, but they are a marked departure from the like total war, neocon war hawk establishment. I think that has definitely permeated my entire lifetime and really before that, where it's a more of a like, okay, yeah, we're willing to kind of have a big stick, so to speak, but we're not going to try to do all these interventions. We're not going to do it unless we, like the cause has to be for actual American interests, and part of American interests isn't just like American hegemony, right? It's still somewhat favorable to Israel and Zionism and things like that, and so there's definitely things to critique there. But like Pete Hegseth, who I think just got confirmed, he's been a proponent of defend the guard, and a lot of them are saying like, so they've effectively, I think, now cut off aid, all foreign aid except to Israel and Egypt. Again, not great. I can go on a pretty big tirade about Zionism and its influence in politics and whatnot. But I have to admit, like, okay, like that's bad, but I mean, there was no evidence that that was going to change under a Harris administration, whereas it was very clear that the Harris administration would continue, unlimited support to Ukraine as well as all the other foreign aid going everywhere. Whereas this, now granted, what's motivating this is more of this like American first, nationalist, semi-isolationist fervor on the right? And is that the best motivation? No. It's kind of like, okay, well, that seems to, at least in the short term, be a better path than the other alternative, which seemed to be just to double down on the American empire in all the worst ways. So I don't know. It's like if we, to use an analogy here, if we as anti-war libertarians are out there in the fight to bring peace, we have been desperately losing for some time now, and I feel like we have to sort of like take the small victories, do a little bit of triage where we have the opportunities to, and this seems like it was like, does it go far enough? No. But already I just see enough of a departure in both rhetoric and even already very quickly, just 5 days into this administration, even in outcome, that I at least think that there's some cause for optimism for those who are concerned about war and who have libertarian conceptions of foreign policy, to say like, okay, like there might be some positive developments in this compared to what we would have had the other side won.
Yeah, I mean, so there is that. I think this really kind of interesting question you brought up about. Well, okay, so to Hegseth in particular, all the Christian nationalists on Twitter are claiming him as one of theirs. He apparently has like a Deus Vult tattoo, which was like the battle cry during the Crusade. And if you follow any of the Christian nationalists on Twitter, they like to talk about how the Crusades were good, actually. So yeah, so if he ends up being more non-interventionist, but for all the wrong reasons, but overall the policy ends up looking a little bit more libertarian than it would have, is that a positive thing? And I'd say, yeah, I think that would be a positive thing. I think my difficulty is I'm looking for the silver linings. I'd like to think that there are some reasons why that we can still have some hope that some good things are going to come out of it. But, I'm old enough now that I've seen, people vote for a candidate with certain expectations, and they're pretty much always disappointed. But also the those who feared the worst were also disappointed. And so I don't know, like, I think when you go back and you look on paper at what Trump 1.0 did, it doesn't look that different in most cases from what came before. It looks, remarkably similar in a lot of ways. And Trump 2.0 could look different because different people are around him. And I think when you see people from across the political spectrum sort of going around, kind of surrounding this person, it's either because he's a great uniter with a really, uniting message that brings people in, or because they think maybe I can manipulate this guy. And I think it's the second. I think it's the latter. And so I think there are some people who are surrounding Trump that we would have some sympathy overall with what they're interested in. Oh my gosh, the Tulsi Gabbard, for example. Tulsi's got a lot of problems, but I think she's closer to us on foreign policy and on government spying, central, this is kind of the deep state stuff. So like that could be someone good to be around him. Elon Musk is going to be a mixed bag because Elon Musk is kind of a populist and he likes that government money, but also sometimes he'll, quote, Thomas Sowell or something. So yeah, it's really tough to say. And I think looking back at Trump 1.0, there was this whole thing where you just wanted to be the last person in the room with him. And that was kind of what all of his advisors say. It's like whoever talks to him last before he makes this big decision, that's the person who wins. And so like, I think he had that immigration summit where he went really hard on immigration kind of early on. Lindsey Graham had called and scheduled that. He was hoping for some sort of more moderate approach. I think it had to do with the Dreamers. And, but then, Stephen, what's his name? Oh, can't think of his name. His immigration czar, Stephen, can't think of the guy's name.
Bannon?
No, not Bannon. No. But another one like that. Like sort of got in the room right before they had the meeting. So all the things that Trump was telling Graham he was going to do, he like did a 180 on. There was like another story that came out that kind of leaked out that the free market people in Trump's first administration sat him down and made him like a PowerPoint, like designed for like a child almost, to like explain why markets, like free markets, were a good thing and why trade was a good thing. And Steve Bannon caught wind of it, and he showed up at the very end of the PowerPoint and like crapped all over it and like got Trump going the other direction. So what does it mean that there's new people around? Well, it means that sometimes it is going to change the direction of the administration, right? Sometimes he's going to say things that sound like Elon Musk, and some things he's going to say things that, sound like Tulsi Gabbard, and, occasionally we're going to like what he has to say. I mean, some of the executive orders I've liked, or at least been kind of, neutral on, where it's like, well, I don't really want the state really, super involved in gender identity issues, but I also like, I agree, like that there's only two genders. So anyways, there's reasons to be hopeful, but I think that there's reasons why no libertarian really should have wanted Trump. I guess that's really what I'm getting at.
Yeah, I mean the executive orders, I'm sure we'll agree here. It's a real mixed bag. Like there are some that you go, oh hey, that's actually good. Then there's some where you go, like, okay, I guess I sort of agree with the sentiment here, but that I don't really want government involved in this at all, or I don't know this is a great. Then there's some that are just like, obviously bad, like designating drug cartels as foreign terrorist organizations. It's just like, okay, cool, just ramp up the war on drugs. I'm sure that'll go well this time and won't infringe on civil liberties and further militarize the police and all sorts of bad things that are going to go horribly wrong. I had hope maybe like a couple years ago that maybe the right was starting to learn their lesson on the war on drugs, and that is definitely something. Now I know Trump has kind of, and again he's wishy-washy, right? Depends on who he's talked to. I know when he talked to like Angela and some other people that he's kind of been like willing to be a little bit softer on marijuana at times, but like, that's not like a deeply held conviction of his. So,
no, I mean he was pretty hard on marijuana in his first term,
right? So, yeah. That's not an area where I'm expecting a lot of wins. The executive orders, I mean, it's one of those things where like every president's going to come in and abuse the hell out of the Constitution. I think we live in a post-constitutional society. I mean, I think we've been in that way for a long time, to be honest. So it's kind of like, okay, they're all going to abuse the office. Which one's going to abuse it in the ways that I find marginally less objectionable than the other ones? I guess, this. So there's two ways that we can talk about this question, and I guess one was, and maybe we can put a bow on that before we really hone in on the second one, was the should libertarians, like, did libertarians have enough cause for optimism to like justify doing what I did and actually voting for him back in November. And it seems like you're saying maybe there is some cause for some optimism, but for you, it didn't meet anywhere close to a threshold that would have convinced you to be like, okay, yeah, I could see, myself actually going and making that decision, or like on a wide scale saying that like libertarians might actually consider this being a worthwhile endeavor. I guess, and I guess so. To steelman your positions, one, you're concerned of the high risk, but also the risk to our reputation. I do think that there needs to be, and this is what I've been trying to be very careful to do, is that like I made it public that I voted for him, and so I've tried to hold myself to a standard to say, just because I voted for him doesn't mean he gets a free pass. Like, I'll clap my hands for every good thing he does, but I'm going to be twice as loud and twice as obnoxious. And yes, people, I can be more obnoxious. Don't put me up to it. But I'm going to be twice as annoying and twice as obnoxious about all the bad stuff he does, because I voted for him. Because I don't want to be captured by some sort of bias to be like, oh, I voted for him and I want him to do good things, so like I'm now like, yippee about calling out his bad things. Maybe I want to make his bad things look better than they actually are to sort of retroactively, justify my decision. And then on the to extrapolate out from that, if a lot of libertarians voted for Trump and then don't put in the effort to continue to call him out, then that it could have the effect. I'm not sure it would, but I could see the argument where it could have the effect that then people, more so than maybe they already do, just associate libertarianism with the right, with the Republican Party, with MAGA, and don't have an actual understanding. I mean, the truth is most people don't have an actual understanding of what libertarianism is, but they'll have an even worse misunderstanding of what libertarianism is if the sort of problem I'm highlighting happens and perpetuates. Is that a fair steel man, or kind of summation of where you're coming from?
Yeah, I mean, so looking at like what the LP did, what the Mises Caucus did with really kind of going in for Trump. I mean, a few years ago, I had people who were just like, Trump is so crazy, like I don't know what to do, but I've never been a Democrat, right? And so like I don't really feel like I belong anywhere, and so like I tried to kind of introduce some people to libertarian thought. And then there were like some people who really didn't look too deeply into it. And then the Mises thing happened. And I was like, man, I'm glad they didn't look too deeply into it, because maybe after this is all over, I can reintroduce them to libertarianism. Because, what I think that what the Mises Caucus really did was sort of say, we're going to try to kind of build a coalition with populist Trump supporting Republicans. It's like, well, those people are already going to vote for Trump. There's nothing that you have to offer them if they're happy with Trump. It's the people who sort of said, like, I don't really feel at home in either of these parties. Somebody needs to make a compelling case for me of an alternative that actually really sounds good. And I don't think we really got that. I think what we sort of got is like, well, we're kind of like Trump, but we're not going to win. It's like, okay, well then why would I care? And so, on this sort of question about that you kind of raised about the kind of what I think of those like libertarians who voted for Trump. So like, if a libertarian or Christian reluctantly votes for Trump, I would look. So let's say, so you and I are credo Baptists. We believe that you should be baptized as a believer, right? So someone who is a libertarian or Christian who reluctantly votes for Trump, I say, well, they're like pedo Baptists. They're baptizing their infants. They're wrong, but whatever. They're off a bit. But like Christians or libertarians who enthusiastically voted for Trump are like Douglas Wilson Federal Vision types. It's like, what are you talking about? That's way out of bounds. Like that's just completely off course. So I mean, I think if I were to kind of maybe sort of summarize like specifically this idea of the coalition that libertarians and Trump kind of made these coalitions together, I would say that coalitions are always risky because over time they tend to erode principled commitments. And we see this in the two major parties all the time because they are constantly shifting based on what their coalitions want to say. There was a time when the Democratic Party were the people who said we got to keep the Mexicans out because we got to protect white labor, because labor voted for them, right?
Hey, Bernie Sanders has never given up that stick.
Right. Yeah, he's too old. He's too old to change to realize that that's all moved to the Republican Party. And we've seen it, I think, with libertarianism. And I know we disagree with this a little bit, but I think we compromised on racism to appeal to paleos, and I think we've compromised with Trumpers over borders. And I don't really think that position is really a libertarian position. And who knows what's next? I mean, as Shakespeare said, "He who sups with the devil should have a long spoon." And as a Christian who understands the Bible to teach that political power is demonically energized, I mean that somewhat literally. So to me, being a libertarian means kind of what I think it means to be a Christian, which is you sort of have these values that you stick with. And, there might be things where you have to take, a lesser ideal in some cases, but overall, I think you avoid moral compromise. You do what you feel is actually the right thing to do. And backing an authoritarian war criminal because he might give us something a little more libertarian than his opponent would have, it just isn't really what I mean when I call myself a libertarian. That's not how I define it.
So I think I agree with you to a point, but so here's the argument I've made. I feel like what I did was consistent with my principles, because my principles are ultimately not thinly the non-aggression principle or libertarianism or libertarian economics. My principles, which are an extension of my Christian faith and principles, are that I am pro-peace, I am pro-human flourishing, I am against human suffering, I am against violence against individuals, I am against injustice, and I am ultimately my primary driving force, and this has been consistent whether I was on the left, the right, or libertarian as I am now, has always been a very like deep in my core, I get angry and stirred up when I see injustice, and I feel compelled to do something about it, to advocate for those who can't advocate for themselves. And for me, just saying, well, listen, libertarianism is this beautiful philosophy, and now let me be clear, I do that, right? Like, you just interviewed me, which will come out later on, about an episode I have coming up where I give, I think, a very eloquent presentation about me saying, I think libertarianism is a great philosophy, and anarcho-capitalism gives us all these answers for how to create a more just society, a more even like equitable society where we're going to have more human flourishing, more social cooperation, and it's actually going to be good for Christians because it would enable society to organize in a way that's more honoring to Christ, that's more compatible with the gospel, that would enable us to share the gospel better with people. So, like, the principles matter, right? And I'm not saying they don't. But if all we do is just teach people about how great these systems are, and that's it, I feel like that doesn't, like, there's a saying in business, right? Like, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And for me, that means, like, I need to actually go out there and try to accomplish something to my core principles, which isn't the libertarian theory, but it's actually like making a difference in the lives of people. So I would again bring up someone like Ross Ulbricht and say, I'm not confident. I can't know. I don't think we can't know the counterfactuals, but I'm not confident that without and say what you want. Listen, there's a lot of drama with the LP right now. There's always something going on with the LP. So, like, listen, you could believe every bad thing that you've ever heard or thought about the Mises Caucus, about Angela, about Heiss, about all of them, right? But I do think it'd be hard to say that you could say that you'd be confident that Trump definitely would have pardoned Ross had it not been for Angela meeting with Trump and having Trump come to the convention and make that explicit promise to, like, I don't know that you could have a confidence that would happen. And so I guess where I'm coming from is that while I want to stay rooted in knowing what is true and being able to use that to then call out the errors of someone like Donald Trump, I also want to do what I can to see things move in the direction of less human suffering. And even if that's not like... So I would say in most elections, both candidates are so similar that it would be a wasted vote to vote for one or the other, because either way it's going to be about the same. This was the first election I can remember since I became a libertarian where I said, I'm actually not convinced it's going to be the same. I actually think there's a strong case to be made that, and I was pretty confident that Ross was going to be freed, that there could be significantly less human suffering if Trump won. And my concern is to keep teaching people about libertarianism, about the gospel, about the problem of political power, while also doing what I can to promote less violence in the world. And I suppose that's sort of why I felt compelled to do what I did, while also trying and doing that and marrying it to being very vocal about why I did what I did, to the point where like I've taken a break to it, doing it somewhat, only because like I don't want to be annoying about it, but like I feel like it's important to tell people like, hey, I did not like I desperately actually want to separate myself from Trump supporters. Like I am not you. Like I did not vote for Trump because I want to own the libs or because I believe in this whole "Make America Great Again" thing or whatnot. Like it was a calculated decision. He made certain promises, and the people around him made certain promises and appeals. And I want to see if any of that happens. And there was enough there that I was, reasonably confident enough that this could actually lead to a net reduction in harm. And I don't think it's going to be on the table every election, to be honest. I thought this was a rather unique situation. But I am concerned about the flip side, and I guess this is somewhat of a criticism of the sort of Christian, libertarian, and anarchist sentiment that I think you have and that a lot of Christian libertarians and anarchists have, which is that sometimes like I get the commitment to wanting to be principled, but if we're so principled that all we do is sit on the sidelines proclaiming to the world how right we are and how wrong they are, while everything still burns, that to me seems to me to kind of miss something about both the Christian faith and also the libertarian philosophy, because I think we should care about principles, but we should also care about people, right? So that's kind of where I'm coming from.
Yeah, I mean, and so if Hitler had risen from the grave and had stolen the Democratic nomination out from Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, it would have been really hard for me to argue against voting for Trump, right? And so I think, though, when we talk about stopping suffering, so like I was super psyched to see Ross freed. But also, this isn't Star Trek 3. The needs of the one don't actually outweigh the needs of the many, as much as we support the rights of the individual, of course. So it's a silver lining to Trump 2.0, but it doesn't justify it. So maybe you can clarify this for me. How does Trump actually create a significantly more just society with less suffering and oppression? Because I simply don't see it.
Well, again, I think it's compared to what I was convinced that with Harris things would continue to get worse, as they seem to get worse over the last 4 years, both domestically and globally, in terms of war, domestic policy, things like that. With Trump, there's enough of so there were the explicit promises like freeing Ross. I don't think that is just one person saved in terms of, like, I think the impact of Ross being freed and the conversations it's spurring, the sort of like symbolic significance of like, what he was convicted for and that he's being freed, I think that's going to have an impact that's kind of hard to measure beyond just the one life sort of saved. And then I think in terms of again, all the caveats I've already said still apply here, right? Like they're not doing these things always for 100% the same reasons or the right reasons I think they should. But at the end of the day, I see a marked departure from being as hawkish as every administration before has been. And there's going to be some bad stuff domestically with immigration. There was already bad stuff with immigration. But I do see great potential for there to be at least more skepticism and potential pushback against the surveillance state, and against sort of it's a mixed bag on things like healthcare, but there's at least sort of like a pushback to be like, hey, maybe like we should not be encouraging people to become like pharmaceutically dependent on this sort of like fascist fascistic healthcare system that we've constructed. That's a hybrid of a bunch of different, acts that have passed over the years. I just think that all those things combined to me were enough to say that, yeah, I think that there's enough there to say that there's, now granted, there's some things we can't know. Like, I don't know if the economy is going, like, we all know the debt and all that stuff like that's a problem. So, like, maybe a year from now, the economy just completely tanks and it was all kind of a moot point anyway. But aside from things outside my control and whatnot, it seemed like there's enough potential here for over the course of 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, for there to be not a like a just society created, but at least no longer hurtling towards the cliff at 1,000,000 miles an hour towards total totalitarianism and total American imperialism and all those things. This is at least pumping the brakes to a significant point where then, like, okay, and that's not to say it's enough. And this is where, like, again, vigilance is required. Like, we should be more loudly than ever proclaiming the right answers to a lot of these things, right? So, like, our work isn't done. Like, it's not like, which I know is a lot of people are like, oh, we're going to save America. It's like, yeah, no, we don't just vote for Trump and then Trump passes a flurry of executive orders and suddenly America's saved. Obviously, it's a lot more complicated than that. But this did seem to me to offer enough on hand that it was hard for me to say, like, for me, it's hard to look at Harris and Trump and go, like, yeah, the same amount of infringement of liberty and the same amount of lives lost was going to happen on both of their watches, which is generally what I would like going back and doing the other one, like Bush and Obama, and the ones before that, like Bush and Kerry, Bush and Gore. Like, you could make a pretty good case that, like, yeah, probably would have been the same either way.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I saw Trump 1.0, and he didn't slow the warfare state. Israel, got crazy during the Biden administration.
Well,
But
I don't know. I
I
mean,
mean, got crazier. The Ukraine thing happened. I mean, it was kind of maybe things were moving in that direction a little bit, but the Ukraine thing happened under the Biden administration. But it's not like Biden invaded Ukraine or Russia. I mean, do you think that the Trump administration was significantly better on warfare stuff than the Biden administration was?
Yeah, I do. I actually don't think, and not that Trump was perfect on all these things. Like, Trump even did some blunders with the Russia and Ukraine stuff. Like, Trump was arming Ukraine up and has some complicity in and a million caveats with all this. It was an unjustified invasion, but it was provoked. It was provoked by many administrations for really decades. We've been poking the bear. And Trump definitely played a part in that, in some of what he did, which included arming up Ukraine. But of course, he inherited a situation from what the Biden administration did in 2000, what the Obama administration did in like 2008 and what in Georgia, and then 2014 with Ukraine. So it's a mess, right? But even Trump 1.0 seemed to at least call out a lot of like the hypocrisy of certain policies of the warfare state, to say, hey, why are we fighting ISIS while also arming the Mujahideen and these bin Ladenites in these other areas just because they're like fighting against Russia or, like serving our interests like that? No, that doesn't make any sense, right? So like Trump even just calling out that was sort of like he was committing blasphemy to the neocon religion at that point, because they'd been doing this for decades, right? And
but without actually offering a principled alternative. So I mean, just the fact that he said it was sufficient to justify voting for him.
Well, no, you were asking me if Trump 1.0. I don't think, going back to 2016, I'm not arguing it was right to vote for Trump then, but the question was Trump 1.0 better than on warfare than the Biden and Obama administrations? And I think, that's a very low bar, but I think yes, I think it's even better than the Bush administration. I mean,
Well, definitely
there
better
were
than
still
Bush
blunders.
administration. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, there were still blunders, but again, it's like it's not even that it's impressive. It's not even that I'm saying like it's great. It's just like for all his flaws, it just seems like he sucked significantly less. Still sucked, but we don't have Ron Paul, right? I mean, he's the hero we deserve, not the hero we need.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't see that Trump is as a tool to fight suffering and injustice. It's not like we've traded.
Well, in 2016, no, but like I guess now it's like now with his experience and the people around him, the explicit promises that were made, and already I'm seeing some encouraging signs on things like the warfare state and on certain domestic things as well. So, I mean, time will tell, but I thought, and also it was like, put it this way, you would agree with me that there was no chance, or I guess like not no, but significantly close to zero chance that if Harris had won, there was any room for improvement on any of these things.
No, that would be pretty status quo. That's why I say Trump is, high risk, high yield. I mean, predictions with Trump are tough because he's a wild card. He could end the threat of nuclear war forever, or he could just start one. I mean, you just don't know. Like, and so like,
I guess I'm like, so maybe this will explain why that doesn't. So keep in mind that in 2016, I was still a card carrying Democrat, and I voted for Hillary Clinton. I know, boos in the crowd. Everyone can put an L in the chat for me voting for Hillary Clinton. I deserve it. I was fear-mongered into it, right? So I was a Bernie Sanders guy, and I don't like to say, certain words on our Christian stream here, but I was livid, okay? I was mad. I was steaming at what the Democrats did to Bernie Sanders, which I think you would even agree, like, they did him dirty.
Yeah. Well, at the time, I said that the Democratic Party did to Bernie Sanders what the Republican Party should have done to Trump, except the Republican Party actually believes in democracy and the Democratic Party doesn't.
Yeah, ironic. But I was like, I was anti-war enough to know like Hillary Clinton's not my guy, and everyone's like, okay, but like, okay, ignore all these bad things because Trump is this existential threat and he could start nuclear war and all these bad things, and like, for all the bad things Trump did, it was pretty much none of the things, other than maybe somewhat of the immigration stuff, that everyone was fear-mongering us about in 2016, right? So I guess, like, to me, maybe I've course, like, overcorrected in that realm, but when someone's like, oh, like Trump's high risk, like, he could just start a war, it's like, I don't know, he's kind of the only president in my lifetime who didn't start a war, and that was after everyone was convincing me and peer pressuring me when I was still a Democrat to vote for Hillary Clinton, which was like, I mean, I don't regret, like, there's a lot of things in life that I hold with regret, but that's probably my single biggest regret is ever having my name linked to a vote for Hillary Clinton. But I was convinced to do that because of the fear mongering. And so I just tend to think like Trump is bad, but like, I just don't ever, the worst case scenario never seems to happen. Now, I guess that's like easy for me to say, and like past performance is an indicator of future performance sometimes, but like it's not a guarantee that he won't do something crazy. And I admit there is an element of his personality and behavior that is somewhat of a wild card, but it just seems like even though in the worst cases he ends up just governing like a typical statist, and so
yeah,
it felt like there was nothing to lose there.
On a lot of his foreign policy stuff, I mean, I think what he kind of does the peace through strength thing, right? But that's kind of risky. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that we as libertarians have been criticizing for a long time, the peace through strength approach. I mean, he would sort of say sort of inflammatory things, but it was like he was kind of betting on that working, and like it worked out. But like I guess that's what I mean when I say him being sort of a wild card, because if things could have went in the other direction in some of these situations. I don't know like what kind of deadline you're up against, but I do have a list of questions we could ask for predictions, so that we can come back here in
yeah,
4
I think
years
we can do. I think we've covered the and listen, like I we can get into that. I'll end by this section by saying that I certainly think that it was like I didn't shame libertarians who didn't vote for Trump. Like I didn't be like, like, oh, you're naive or you're like it. Like I can defend my position, but I completely respect, understand Christians and libertarians who didn't do it. And I think I've acknowledged, like for me, it was a gamble, and if it ends up being a bad gamble, I'll have to live with that. But I felt reasonably confident that like it was worth doing, and I think you would at least admit and hope that there are hopefully some good things that could happen, and we can pray and try to encourage for those good things to happen insofar as that it might lead to a reduction in human suffering. So in terms of the thesis of this episode, like, could Trump 2.0 be good for liberty? Like, it'll be bad for liberty in so many ways, but the ways that it could be good, and maybe already we've seen some wins, hopefully, that continues. I do expect, and I'll admit this, I do expect that in terms of just number of things, I'll probably be disappointed more often than I'm happy. I just hope the wins are meaty, right? I hope the wins make a lot of impact.
I mean, I think, I think there are chances for some good things under a Trump administration to come out that wouldn't happen under a Harris or a Jeb Bush or Hillary Clinton administration. I just think that some of the risks are too high. I think my concluding sort of argument before we do predictions is really just this: raise your hand if you didn't vote for a war criminal to be president last year.
Nice.
All right, so predictions. So if you've got any, you can throw them in, but I've got some. They're really kind of like yes or no sort of questions. So hopefully that means we don't have to get super nuanced, so we can kind of judge this in year, 2 years, 3, 4 years from now, and see how we did. So question 1: will Trump increase tariffs?
I find it hard to believe that in a total of 4 years that there will not be an introduction of new tariffs. I hope, like, he does that piece by strength thing. Mm-hmm. I hope the tariff thing works out that way. I hope he passes tariffs and then countries back off and maybe they go away, but that's a gamble. And it doesn't always work out the way people want it to when they try that.
Yeah, he certainly won't be able to do that if that's how he's funding the government. Okay, so 2: will Trump significantly decrease taxes?
That remains to be seen, but I don't know. So he did cut taxes in his first term. I don't know. If forced to pick yes or no, did you say decreased or significantly decrease?
I said significantly, but you could give it just a decrease if you want.
It just depends on like where that threshold is. I would say it's more likely than not that he decreases some taxes somewhere. I don't know. Like there's so many things that go into how those things get passed that like it could be significant or it could be like hardly anything. So that's hard to say. But I think in 4 years, especially the first 2 years while he has the sort of like Republican mandate in the House and Senate, hard for me to believe they don't bring some kind of legislation to the table to do some tax cuts.
Yeah, so I'm going to say that I think he will increase tariffs. On the whole, I think he'll probably decrease taxes. But I don't think he's going to get rid of the IRS. I don't see that happening. But I mean, that'd be pretty interesting.
It would be pretty amazing if he did, but that just, yeah, I kind of agree. Like that seems more in the spectrum of promises and proposals he's made that were more or less reasonable. That's more of the pie in the sky one for me.
Yeah. Well, and my concern is something like that is I want to get rid of the IRS, but if you do it the wrong way, then you guarantee that that's never going to be on the table again. So,
yes. Yep.
All right. Will Trump reduce government spending overall?
No. Yeah. Like,
I'd say 100% no.
Pretty like I almost never do 100% anything, but in terms of like it's as close to 100% as you could possibly imagine that there's almost no chance he's going to decrease government spending.
Will Trump build the wall? And we're not even going to ask about who's going to pay for it. Will it be built?
Will it be built? He'll build some more of it. I don't know if he'll finish it. He didn't finish it last time.
Didn't Biden add a little bit to it?
Yeah, so I mean, more wall will be built.
Will be big and
worthless.
I think if he got Amish contractors, that could be done within the first year of his term, I think.
Listen, I'll make it happen, but they got to build the wall around Washington D.C., not Mexico.
All right, so will Trump resolve the war in Ukraine? He's promised he will. He said it was going to happen on day one. Is it going to happen?
I think it'll happen. I think it might take longer than. I mean, we're already past day one. I think it. So they've already ended foreign aid. If I had to make a prediction, I would say I think the fighting is going to stop by the end of summer, and I think they'll have negotiated at least some kind of tentative peace deal, or at least more long-term lasting ceasefire by the end of the year. That's my somewhat optimistic prediction.
Do you think that Russia gets more than the Donbass? Because if it was just like the Donbass, because a lot of those people actually would rather be in Russia, like part of me doesn't, I mean, if that was all it was about and Russia took the Donbass and they said, okay, that's it, we're done, like that wouldn't have been great, but I would have been like, well, okay. But obviously they want more than that. So like, do you think that Russia...
I think that the deal would have to be that they keep the Donbass, and they might need to have certain accesses and like concessions for not taking entire territories, but like some bases they have or access to certain resources. But I think another important component of the deal is going to have to include concessions from the U.S. and NATO to pull back certain military equipment, military bases that are stationed in like Poland and other NATO countries that are close to Russia's border, and some kind of guarantee in writing that Ukraine is not going to be part of NATO. Like, it's hard for me to think that Putin is going to sign a deal that doesn't have those things included in it.
Yeah, I agree. And I think you gave a sort of a nuanced answer earlier about Russia being provoked compared to what some people have said. But like, to me, it's like, oh, well, Ukraine tried to join NATO and that's a provocation. And it's like, I mean, if I had a neighbor that was always like threatening to kill me and then I got a gun, like, I haven't provoked that neighbor. Like, he's provoked me. I've got the gun because he's been, anyway. So yes. Do we need to do a break before we read more of these, Jacob? Looks like something might be happening. Oh, the great and powerful Norm, the man behind the curtain.
Whoa. Now, hold on.
He's our fearless leader, Norman Horn, for those who don't know.
Howdy, everybody.
Are you jumping in on our predictions, or did you have some breaking news to bring in here?
Oh, no, I'm just jumping in. I just got back from a little shindig with my son, who recently turned 7. So,
aw. Well, happy birthday.
Well,
okay, so we're doing predictions. So I'll get you in the last few that we do here, Norm. Will the Israel-Palestine situation get better under Trump? And better is kind of subjective, but it is a yes or no question. So,
I mean, I suspect that it'll get better, but that's not necessarily, I would say, directly because of Trump.
It just has to eventually.
But I think it kind of like it's at such a low point that it's just gonna improve.
It's
at
hard
some
to
point.
God forbid it gets worse.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
So, yeah, I think it kind of has to get. I think it'll if by better you mean less conflict, yes. I don't know that it'll be better in terms of like the actual underlying grievances and problems that exist there with what to do with the Palestinians and the Gaza
problems
Strip
aren't
and
going to go away.
Bank. The problems are not going to go away, but like hopefully the mass, human death campaigns come to an end temporarily.
Yeah. Will the warfare state shrink under Trump? You suggested, Jacob, that you thought there was a significant chance of that.
Yeah, I mean, not enough, but I think that there will be some reductions in that. There's already been the executive orders to sort of end a lot of foreign aid, including to Ukraine and whatnot. So
I thought you were going to say DEI, and I was like, well, that's not really what I meant.
No, but again, and so this is where like I give Trump a little bit of credit, but as I've said already, what's driving a lot of this is not a true libertarian anti-war spirit, and so we have to be careful to simultaneously celebrate any wins in the reduction of the warfare state, while also kind of calling attention to the problems that exist with isolationism, with nationalism, and continuing because like they're not going to get so good on war that other foreign interventionisms are going to completely end, right? So
Yeah.
we do have to be vigilant and understand that, like, it's public choice theory, right? Like in 4 more years, someone else is going to be in office, and even if Trump did a bunch of great things by just executive order and fiat, like all that could just be completely undone in 4 years by another president anyway. So
With executive orders and fiats.
right? So we have to continue to be vigilant and to call out how like celebrate any movement towards peace while continuing to push ever harder to say, and that's still not enough. We still need to go further than that.
Yeah. What happens afterward? Like, did you change your mind about maybe the nature of interventionism? Have you figured out that there was problems that maybe you can prevent next time? If you don't, then it's just going to happen again.
Well, exactly. Like we said with the whole Israel thing, like if you just stop the fighting, and I'm not saying don't stop the fighting.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
if all you do is stop the fighting, but it's like, okay, so now we just killed a bunch of Palestinians, and the Palestinians still don't have their own state. They're still living under basically, this kind of like basically like subjugation in the Gaza Strip, and they're still losing territory in the West Bank. Yeah, I'm sure that won't lead to more terrorist attacks in 10, 15 years, like the last time they did this back in.
Yeah.
So it's like we have to, history doesn't always repeat itself, but it rhymes. So like we have to point this out.
Okay,
like, hey,
George Lucas.
Like we've been here before, and if we don't do things differently this time, we'll be here again.
And Norm, you missed my Star Trek 3 reference earlier, so you'll have to go back and watch that.
I will have to.
Yeah, so I don't think I gave my answer for these last two, but we're trying to track these so that way 4 years from now, when we're in our flying cars and war is abolished, I can tell Jacob that he was right. But
fantastic.
Yeah, so Israel Palestine. I mean, I think it does get better, but not necessarily because of Trump. I agree with that. I think the warfare state, if we're judging by the first administration, I think it stays pretty much the same. I think there's a chance that something big happens one direction or the other, but I think it probably stays about the same.
So, okay, I may ask you to parse that out a little bit for me, because it was the Biden administration that escalated Ukraine.
Yeah, so we could. I think that live chat is the Scott Horton one, so we may want to keep that there.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead.
Oh well, I'm not necessarily particularly hopeful.
Yeah,
but I think I would just I might word it slightly like parallel in a manner that if we are judging it by the potential for Ukraine for the let me rephrase that. If we're judging it by the potential for the U.S. to reduce its involvement in Ukraine, then I would say we have a better than 50-50 of improvement.
Just by Ukraine ending.
Yeah.
If Trump has anything to do with Ukraine ending, then that means he's made an improvement.
Yeah, but I think that we're running some risks in the immediate future with regards to foreign policy and it, because we're kind of reaching economic warfare stages. The potential. I don't know if you guys how much you've talked about tariffs yet.
We did some talk on that, and that's definitely a concern, and that's why it's like the isolationist strain that's leading to some of the willingness to end interventionisms comes with the drawback of but tariffs and isolationism and restricting free trade isn't pro peace. It
isn't. It's kind of like on a sliding scale. It's better to have economic sanction like that than outright.
I mean, Iraq in the
warfare,
90s,
but
Iraq in the 90s with the economic sanctions wasn't exactly a great place to be.
I mean, and we know what happened. That was one of the bits that led to the blowback in 9/11 and so on. So that's not to say like, hey, yeah, let's go this direction because it's good, but rather we can kind of, it depends on by what scale we're judging. I don't think I probably should go off on tariffs. I did that during one of our live streams closer to the election itself, and explaining from even a manufacturer's point of view, part of what goes on in our minds as to how to work with that. I can continue to, validate that based on my own personal experience and what we're doing and what we're preparing for and what we know is happening. Just as a sidebar for a sec, like there was a 10% slapped on tariff this week as part of the executive orders and whatever the legislation is going through. And that was, and it was pretty explicit. This is like not a Trump maneuver to try and get them to the negotiating table. It's like, this is just happening. Boom. Congratulations, everybody. Your prices are going to increase by 10% plus margin. Good job.
Yeah.
Well, that was one thing we talked about too, is there's this whole idea that Trump is just doing a good cop, bad cop thing to try to get people to the table. But if he wants to fund the government with tariffs, that's not going to happen. He's just going to have to do it. Yeah. Okay. So I got three more. Will the deep state be, and this is somewhat of a subjective question, will the deep state be significantly wounded under Trump, or do we feel like it pretty much stays the same?
How do we define deep state there?
That's a good question. Well, we can talk about the intelligence agencies. We can talk about the military industrial complex.
If we're talking, MIC stuff, that's debatable. If we're talking more extended stuff, there's some. I think like if we include the MSM as part of that in a manner, kind of like fourth estate sort of stuff, like they're already wounded, and like they.
Yeah, I feel like so. Here's where I would say, to piggyback on what you're saying, Norman. Yes, but that won't be mostly attributable to Trump. That'll be mostly attributable to the fact that they've kind of screwed themselves.
Yeah.
Like they've really overplayed their hand. So you could say like Trump by no even like because of Trump, he's such a unique character, right?
Yeah.
That he by accident trolled them into basically overplaying their hand and sort of exposing themselves to now where people do not trust these agencies the same way they did, and there's more I guess like general consensus towards like these things need rolled back and whatnot. So it's like I kind of think that the intelligence agencies might like have some significant reductions to them or reforms to them will make the FBI more efficient. So
we'll see about that.
Yeah.
So do you think they could be significantly defunded?
I wonder, like, if I was going to guess, we might see something like a reduction in personnel and, like, maybe some executive orders or things passed to kind of, like, say, like, hey, you need to be focusing on these things and not these other things. But, like, so I guess it depends on what you mean by significant, because that's kind of a subjective thing. Like, I think they've already waned some of their influence, and I think they'll lose some political battles here, but I don't think it's going to go away. And then, I mean, even if you beat the deep state, then you have to start fighting the deep state, right? So
well, and also like even if you beat certain portions of the deep state, you are not dealing with perhaps the bigger elephant in the room, which are entitlements, and the fact that is the primary driver of the increasing debt. And the negative economics or repercussions of the economics of that are just like, I think they're substantially larger than even what the deep state can do. Because we could surmise something for a second, like in an extreme case, let's suppose that DOGE, for instance, made it we would say this is a net positive. Let's say that DOGE goes to the Pentagon and says, look, whatever you can't actually account for in your budget, you will not get that budget anymore. And of course they won't be able to. But what is that going to improve by? It's not going to be $1 trillion. It's going to be like maybe a few billion, right? I don't recall exactly what that is, but like, what's the unaccounted for budget of the Pentagon that they've completely effed up? Oh, sorry.
Flipped up, I think is what you meant with the F.
Oh, that's what I meant. Yeah, yes. Yeah.
Well, I almost feel like DOGE is a good idea for the 1980s, 1990s. At this point, I guess like I really love the sentiment, but it almost feels like shuffling chairs on the Titanic, right? It's like
exactly.
So,
If you're just more efficient, congratulations, you just made your seating arrangement a little more efficient.
Cutting $10 billion from the Pentagon budget is like, okay, cool, but like
that's a rounding error. I mean, to them, like that's ridiculous.
Those are child numbers.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. That's why entitlements are where it's at, and if we don't, deal with that problem.
Actually, Norm, good news or bad news, depending on whether we're going with the real world or the hypothetical one. So Pentagon has 3.8 trillion in assets, and it couldn't account for half of them in a 2023.
Okay, so that would
be pretty good.
So yeah, if you were able to, well, I mean, if we could just defund the Pentagon, then that is a significant thing. But again, as I've said this before, right? Like it's a travesty that the 2024 presidential campaign was basically an argument about whether or not we'd increase the national debt by 4 trillion or 6 trillion over the next 4 years. That's pretty pathetic. So yeah, it would be nice to, if you can kind of cut some stuff, but sorry,
I think there's a chance that Trump maybe doesn't fill all of the appointments in the intelligence agencies, but I don't see anything significantly happening with them. Personally.
Yeah, I think so. Looping back to the question and the prediction, at least, do I see the deep state like significantly reducing? No, not relative to the size of the entire federal government per se.
Okay.
But I'm hopeful that we see some improvements here and there. Like,
yeah. All right,
I don't know.
Got 2 more.
Marginal.
Okay. I got 2 more. Will Trump decrease regulations? And I'm going to say probably.
Yes, I would agree with that. So. I think it's going to happen. The question is which ones are going to be actually significant.
Yeah.
I mean, getting rid of like the DEI departments of the federal government agencies is a pretty nice step forward. Now, that's not strictly speaking regulation, but it is in how they direct their operations. So
and it's government money.
Yeah, that plus, so that's an indicator of net positives that could be to come. But I mean, I'll be looking at things like, I'll be very curious to see what happens. Just mainly because this is where I operate professionally a lot. I'll be really interested to see what the mandates are going to be going down to EPA and FDA. Because there's just, my experiences, I've had some positive experiences with people in EPA. So, good shout out to the good folks there. Your enforcement division sucks. And, and they're awful.
Well, that's one agency I could see Trump, doing something with somewhat significantly. Maybe.
It's gonna, and that's one of the reasons why I'll be looking, or paying close attention, is that I think there's something is going to happen there, because something kind of has to happen, because it's a mess. It's an absolute mess. Same with the FDA. There's just, it's such an absolute mess that it's undoubtedly there could be some net positives there. I mean, there's even been some interesting moves even in the last couple of days from NIH, the National Institute of Health, which I keep a little less track of, but I mean, basically like calm freezes and complete reviews that are going to be ordered. And I have a lot of mixed feelings about this, because it's like, it looks like that it could go in the net positive direction, but it also could have some fallout that is potentially net negative as well. Not sure yet.
Well, Jacob, what do you think? Does Trump decrease regulations or no?
I think he will. It's going to be interesting to see there's the seen and the unseen, right? And we're generally pro cutting things, but that doesn't mean that there's not unintended consequences. Sometimes, Trump's not Ron Paul cutting things, right?
Yeah,
Trump is going to be cutting things that, like, not that you ever want to be on the side of defending government regulation, but there is there are better and worse ways to go about cutting regulation. And if you the worst case scenario is he cuts so I want to make a comparison here and be careful to not be too lengthy my comparison here, but remember cutting Glass-Steagall, right? Now, we understand the issue of what caused the '08 collapse is more fundamental than just repealing government regulations. We know that really government intervention in the economy and the Federal Reserve and whatnot, that this is really the fundamental issue. But because we had things like that, because we had federal deposit insurance and whatnot, that created the housing bubble, that had the potential to create a housing bubble, then when Glass-Steagall and I forget the other one were repealed, that did create a perfect storm of, government interventions and like on one side with nothing on the other side, which then exacerbated it turned into a very bad bubble and crash, right? So I can't give you an exact prediction of how that could happen now, but like that's something we should always be mindful of. And then of course that gets blamed on the free market, right? Like, oh, you cut regulations and then everything went to crap. And so like that'd be my major concern. Other than just that, does it make a huge difference? Because some of them, like, you're happy, but like, again, it can be somewhat like I forget how many regulations he cut his first term. They go like, oh, he cut so many, and it's like, how many of them made a huge difference?
It was 14 or whatever, yeah, or something.
Well, I think you make a good point, Jacob. The what I sort of think about, like, as libertarians, we're sort of always complaining about the kind of house that we're building, if we're going to compare the country to a house. But it's like, to a certain extent, like, this is the house we're in, and so how you take it apart matters. And so, like, you don't take down a retaining wall, like, first thing, right? So there is a certain kind of logic to how you want to approach it. So that makes sense.
If we can count in the scope of what is regulatory, certain, like, I may, and you can stop me if I'm getting ahead of you here, but the potential for something like the Department of Education to just be deleted, if that were, if I were to give a wish list on like certain things that would have long-term, really positive implications that isn't just dealing with the retaining wall, but would significantly make an impact down the line, then getting rid of the Department of Education would be one of them. That would be really, really huge. That's just noting that as if we count that in kind of the, man, maybe that's hope against hope. You may get too much into that. But
that'd be great. But I think even there, I think we'd probably agree that you want to sort of phase it out and sort of have a timetable in mind so that things can sort of shift downward in a way that makes some sense, right?
See, I don't know. See, that one is almost where I'd go like, I don't care the cost. Just
see the reason why. Is like there's so much money there that is really just directed into this, like, because keep in mind the states actually run their systems, right? So even if you eliminate the Department of Education, it's some of the people, whether on the left or the right, would be like, oh no, public schools will disappear. It's like, no, that's not how it works. The Department of Education at a federal level is literally a middleman that doesn't need to exist. It's ridiculous that we have that it even exists in the first place. It's kind of dumb. I mean, if anything, like it'll cause more turmoil in universities than it would for the public school systems themselves, for like primary and secondary, because that's going to have to then be dealt with by the states. If you just eliminate those monies and eliminate that pork and eliminate that middleman, a lot happens that's a net positive. And you know what? The universities could stand to be kind of screwed around with a little bit. They need to get some they need a wake-up call.
so the Department of Education is kind of like a plug-in that you can plug out, and then it doesn't really make a big difference.
Yeah, I think in the end, I believe that is exactly the case.
Here's I don't want to, like, I know we're kind of running long on time here, but just I'm curious your thoughts, Norman. I've often been on the more like willing to compromise side of this, where I go, I'm like, and the Department of Education, but I'm willing to, if that's on the table, then entertain forgiving some or even all student loan debt. Is that something that would be
on the money that we could save?
If you'll say some, then sure, I'll hazard that, but I will not take on the word all without an economic analysis there.
All right, we got one last question we can end on. One last question we can end on. It's, will you be happier 4 years from now with where the country is politically and economically?
Ooh. parts of me will be like, yeah, I'll be happier, I think. But I think there will be some there. I'm still going to have to deal with, some of the same things, and some of it in heightened sense,
Yeah.
So
if COVID wouldn't have happened, Trump's economic thing would have been okay, right? That would have looked pretty good overall compared to
if it hadn't been for
administrations.
now we're breaching a field.
Because Trump, it's how Trump responded to it.
If COVID hadn't happened, Trump would have won a second term.
No, I think you're probably right.
Then that's a foregone. To me, that's like a foregone conclusion.
Yeah,
we can talk about that later, but I'm on record on that point.
Yeah. Well, and I think the Trump administration was already on track to spend more than Obama had, before COVID happened.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah.
Well, what do you say, Jacob? Will you be happier 4 years from now?
I'm gonna say yes, in the sense that I think that there will be a combination of some important improvements that we can celebrate, but with enough, and this is a prediction, which I could be wrong on, but I guess my optimistic prediction is that there will be enough where Trump doesn't go far enough, where this administration doesn't go far enough, that perhaps people will be more amenable to the idea that, we need to roll back certain things with a lot of things with the state, and half measured isn't cutting it, right? Because I feel like there are certain things that are somewhat Trump's fault, but are somewhat outside of his control, because it's just like the debt keeps on growing, there are certain things in motion that are just in motion that doesn't matter doesn't matter if Ron Paul went in there today, right? It would be hard to, even if we had like a Milei here, like we applaud Milei for what he's done in Argentina, to have that kind of turnaround in America would be even more miraculous, right? So, because we have so much inertia.
You actually have to have the country fall apart, like it did in Argentina.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So we might be heading that way no matter what. Like there might be small wins that we get in terms of reduction of certain, violations of liberty and loss of life, like I've talked about several times here, where I'm kind of optimistic. And the other stuff on the economic front, I'm kind of that's going to continue to get bad, and that it can go two ways. One, it can go the way of people then knee-jerk react and go, we have too much freedom and economic liberty, and we gotta have the government come in and rescue us, and that'll just make things worse. But I don't know, maybe naively, or maybe but somewhat cautiously optimistic that people in 4 years are going to be at least more amenable to hearing the ideas of libertarians, and perhaps that'll have something to do with the few liberty-oriented things that Trump and the people in his orbit have talked about and are pursuing. I thought it was really cool. I don't know if you saw it, Norm, but when Trump made the statement pardoning Ross, he gave major credit to libertarians for that. So this is a very critical 4 years. If we as a movement can, I know this is on your radar too, Norman, if we can navigate this space of sort of simultaneously celebrating any good thing that happens while kind of also being very insistent to keep pushing on them to go, yeah, but now what? And this isn't enough. There's a potential opportunity there to, perhaps see some major expansion in interest in libertarian ideas. And I'm always optimistic. So I'm hoping and optimistic that I will be happy in 4 years, because hopefully we're seeing some traction in that.
Yeah, when I think economically, there are certain things that Trump is going to do that are going to be positive. I think the stock market's going to respond positively to him. I think that there's a sense that people have on that level that Trump is good for business. I think the deregulation stuff, which he's probably going to do, is going to be good for business. I think his immigration policy is probably going to hurt trade overall. His tariff policy, as much as he can do of that, is going to hurt. So it's kind of tough to say, but if he's not able to if he backs off the immigration stuff, if he backs off the tariff stuff, and there's nothing happens like COVID that makes him want to spend, print trillions of dollars in money,
Mm-hmm.
then I think overall, I think we'll be in a better place economically, and
Yeah.
we'll be happier about that. Politically, it's tough to say. I think, I think Trump, even without that mainstream media response, is kind of so toxic for the political kind of just the vibe of of the country,
Mm-hmm.
that I think I'll be glad to see him go, in any case, probably.
I think there are things that we can hope for, that if some of the rhetoric comes to pass, and then it is succeeded by additional reforms that make things that like begin to put back into place better measures for operation, we could see some pretty interesting improvements. Now, I'll give you an example because I think the immigration one is pretty apropos here. I am not a fan of the way in which this has been going down, with the potential, like the so-called mass deportations and whatever that ends up looking like and whatnot. Stuff's going to happen, and it's not going to be pretty. However, if it ends up getting also succeeded by some serious immigration reform that makes it possible for people to just enter the country legally more easily, like legally as in, with the way it should be done, or whatever. If it just, like, the whole problem and the arguments around like H-1Bs and various other ways in which you can enter the country and then find work, do create economic progress and so on. If that becomes easier, and it just, like, we see some sweeping reform that gets that done, then we could see that the negative repercussions of the mass deportations be mitigated somewhat.
So, are you suggesting it's almost like kind of the good cop, bad cop thing with tariffs, where like maybe Trump somehow brings people to the table to solve immigration because they're like, this is horrible, we have to do something different than this? Or
if I'm not giving, I did not think that's what he's doing. Mm-hmm. In other words, but if we end up in a position where we actually do see immigration reform come through, that could be the long-term strategy. I don't think that's what he's doing right now. From like he's not playing 4D chess with these people. That's not what's going on.
But basically, it's kind of like the adults in the room have to say, we've got to do something about little Donald because he's throwing a tantrum, and we've got to fix it. Is that kind of like the?
Well, it's like, it's so dadgum obvious that. Well, actually, let's put it this way, because what's going to happen is this, right? When you start beginning to see an outflow of people, let's say that these mass deportations or whatever that ends up becoming, that the result of which is going to be some economic slowdown. It is going to be harder to get stuff done. I mean, we like, it is not, it should not be lost upon anybody that there's lots of work done in this country by immigrants, many of whom are illegals, and I would like to have a lot more mercy to that effect than I think, many people many people would. But you can't deny that there's a lot of economic activity that happens from illegal immigrants. And in fact, it was noted years ago by the comptroller of the state of Texas, who did a study on the economic effects of illegal immigrants, and found that there was far more benefit than drawbacks to having illegal immigrants in the state of Texas. It just turns out that the economic activity, that's the way it worked out. Now, that was 10 years ago or so, and I'm not trying to diminish the fact that, of course, there are bad actors out there, and so on. But there's also evidence that, can suggest that illegal immigrants certainly are not as violent as they're made out to be sometimes by people like Trump, what he would like to say about them. So that being said, like, you kind of see where I'm going here, though. It's like, okay, so let's say they begin to diminish the economic activity of that sector. What are they going to do to replace it? Is everything just going to get more expensive? That's not going to be good. You know what that'll get called? Inflation. Like, even though it's not really inflation, it's just, well, supply demand changed and so on. So if supply goes down, but demand stays the same or increases because growth happens, well, prices are going to increase. Ta-da! Welcome to Economics 101. So what do you do to solve that? If you do actual immigration reform, make it easier to get back in, that would be an answer.
Are you seeing, Norm, or some of these industries that rely on a lot of migrant
Migrant
workers,
labor,
maybe even not even necessarily illegal migrants, because
Yeah.
they're detaining people who are totally legal.
Yeah.
In some cases, that a lot of those folks are not showing up to work, and there's a concern about that slowing down the supply chain significantly.
Yeah. I think that's a very real risk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think those are my questions. And if there's anything else we want to talk about before we wrap it up, we can. But otherwise, Jacob, you can.
Maybe we could all
down.
give just our closing thoughts on. So, I mean, the question here of the stream, which we've covered from many different angles, is, will Trump 2.0 be good for liberty? Again, I am the hopeless romantic and optimist of the group. I think no matter
Trump does that.
I think
having 5 children.
I think that well, I don't have a choice but to be an optimist in that case, right? I think that I obviously think, and that's part of the reason I voted for Trump, was that as bad as he was, there was significant opportunity to be had here. But I think that cuts both ways. Like, even if all that opportunity gets squandered, there is still, I think, cause for optimism, because at some point, and maybe I'm wrong, right? Maybe this is my
we'll tell you,
naivete, but my hope is that at some point people have to realize that, like, if at this point, with all of the hoopla that went around this, with Trump having both houses of Congress and bringing in an influx of people who aren't just a bunch of, like, for all the flaws of people like Tulsi Gabbard and RFK, and I know Vivek's kind of stepping out, but you have Elon still. These are not perfect libertarians, but they're not like, establishment stooges, right? Like, it's an influx of kind of a new energy and something that's not more of the same. And the American people basically gave Trump and this team a mandate to be like, we don't want more of the same. We want something different. And a lot of that was tied to at least some libertarian ideas. Well, if they fail to deliver on that, it's going to be a major repudiation of the Republican Party's ability to ever effectively cut back government. And so at some point then it's like, okay, well then conservatives and liberty, friendly people, I think then have to start considering, like, what do we actually have to do to effectively move this country towards liberty? Because at that point, I don't think that anyone can make any kind of argument that voting Republican in the future is going to be the way to get there. So to me, it's a heads I win, tails you lose scenario. Like, either good stuff happens and we can just kind of build off that momentum, or nothing happens, everything stays the same or gets worse, and we can go, well, we've tried that, now what? So that's my closing thought, if you guys want to give any closing thoughts before we hop off. But that's kind of my answer to the question of, will Trump 2.0 be good for liberty?
I'll say something quickly and give Norman the last word, which is just that, I mean, as I've said, I mean, there's reason for optimism in certain areas. I think Trump is kind of a wild card, and there's certain things that he'll predictably probably do. There's certain things that could be much better or much worse 4 years from now. And I think what I would say overall is just, I mean, now that we're here, we kind of have nothing else to do but hope for the best. But, kind of going back to, was this the kind of right decision to make, that we sort of coalition with Trump? And I'll just end by quoting Shakespeare again: "He who sups with the devil should have a long spoon." I think it was a dangerous calculation that we've made. High risk, but maybe high yield. We'll see.
Oh, who's this we you're talking about? I didn't coalition with anybody.
Well, no, neither did I. But I was being generous to
Jacob. I think for me, going back to some of the things that I appreciated in Trump 1.0, I might be, if anything, a little more positive in of all the areas I would say I'm a little positive in. I would say that foreign policy may actually be the good one. I do think that there's, I mean, I don't think I'm contradicting what I said earlier when I say, like, I do think there's probably gonna it's gonna be better than under Biden, or Harris for that matter. And the reason I would suggest that is that based on Trump 1.0, where there were the best things that I kind of saw at the time were things like, wow, we actually got into some real conversations with things like places like North Korea, and made some real progress in some areas where I wouldn't have expected that. If that can be replicated, that would be a real net benefit. What I'm concerned about in terms of where that could backfire, though, is precisely because of the emphasis on tariffs, and that if we did not see as grandiose an issue of tariffs coming down the pipes during the 2016 to 2020 years, like that all this stuff that kind of was rhetoricized and all that at the time didn't come as much to pass. So that's where I'm kind of like, I see there's some potential good and some potential for like offsetting. Domestically, there are some obvious things that are already, I mean, if look, Ross Ulbricht, being freed is a tremendous thing. Praise the Lord. Well-deserved. Awesome to see. But then again, we're also seeing, weird stuff going on too, right off the bat. And so how do you weigh those together? So in the end, am I positive or negative? Am I a hopeless romantic or a cynical jerk? I'm somewhere in between. But I do know this, though. Everybody watching this, if they read The Anarchist Anabaptist, coming up, recently about to be released by our one and only Cody Cook over here, they will benefit in 4 years. And if you read Faith Seeking Freedom 2.0 coming out later this year, you'll benefit by the end of the year. And if you read A House Divided, which will be coming out soon as well. In other words, if you take it upon yourself to be the one improved unit, you're going to benefit. So do that.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. No, I think it's well said. I think, we're waiting for Jesus to come back, right? Until then, we're just doing what we can to proclaim the truth of his gospel and also the truth of what the Bible teaches us about liberty, government, property rights, all that stuff. And doesn't create utopia, but if it, not to sound cliche, but it can improve individual lives. I mean, Ross's life is a lot better now than it was a week ago, and the individuals listening to this stream, their lives can be improved as well. And it's all we can do, right? Is keep up the good fight. And so no matter what happens, the stuff we're doing here at LCI, that's going to remain the same. And I think we're all optimistic about what's going on there. So,
I think our mission is encouraging the individual to live free in an unfree world. At least that's part of it. And so, that's one thing that you can affect change in is yourself, for sure.
Go read The Anarchist Anabaptist. It's awesome.
Thank you, Norm.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks, Norm, for stopping in. Thanks, Cody, for, I think, what is this, like 3 or 4 in a row now?
Yeah, I'm getting a little sick of seeing your face, if I'm honest.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I gotta find, I gotta get Norm to start drafting people to talk to me other than Cody.
Go you.
Yeah. Well, thanks everybody for being with us for these 2 hours of your Saturday evening. Got over 228 live viewers, so that's pretty cool. Over 200 of you don't have anything better going on a Saturday night than to listen to us talk about faith, freedom, liberty, and how optimistic or pessimistic we are about Donald Trump going forward. If you like what we're doing here, make sure you subscribe, give this video a thumbs up wherever you're watching it, and as it says at the bottom ticker there, you can go to libertarianchristians.com/donate. if you want to support what we're doing, if you sign up at $10 or more a month, you become an LCI insider. And yeah, keep an eye out for more exciting stuff coming down the pipeline. And that's all we have for you guys for tonight. Live at peace and live for Christ, and take care.